at the same time, a bold move from Zelensky and the Ukrainians, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. They now say they're applying for NATO membership, Saagar. We are de facto allies already, Zelensky says. De facto, we have already proven compatibility with alliance standards. Ukraine is applying to confirm it de jure by an expedited procedure. Now, if you've been following this, you'll recall the fact that that NATO membership was held out to Ukraine was one of the sort of things that antagonized Putin and led to help to create the conditions for this conflict to start with. So, and then obviously the other piece of this that is crazy is if they are NATO allies, then we are obligated to go in full force on their behalf, which I don't think is anything that any of us ultimately want to see. But, you know, that's basically what he's sort of angling for is we should be direct allies. You should be all in with us. It shouldn't be this just like supplying us from behind. You should be here defending us because we've already proven that we're good allies here.
Yeah, and I know I'm not supposed to shred Churchill, the next Zelensky. His arrogance actually drives me crazy because what he says is we are already a de facto member of NATO. No, you're not. You don't just get to choose whether you're NATO or not. NATO gets to decide whether you're in NATO. And luckily, there are some people with some brains who remain in the White House. Jake Sullivan and Biden very clearly just pushing this aside whenever they're asked about it. Let's take a listen.
Yeah.
Ukraine is seeking accelerated membership in NATO. Is that something that's possible or something you would seriously consider?
The United States has been clear for decades that we support an open door policy for NATO. Any decision on NATO membership is between the 30 allies and the countries aspiring to join. Right now, our view is that the best way for us to support Ukraine is through practical on-the-ground support in Ukraine, and that the process in Brussels should be taken up at a different time.
That's a very nice way of saying no, not right now.
Saying
at a different time. I love that. That honestly, diplomacy pro for being like, we support Ukraine, absolutely. There's an open door policy for any nation, not just policy. He's like, but that decision will be taken up at Brussels. Right now, we're just going to focus on this, which is like kind of like a head pat and be like, that's nice, Zelensky, but it's not going to happen. I really don't know what to make of Zelensky's move because he seems to have misread this almost completely. Like, just because everybody in the West is upset about Putin's nuclear saber rattling, everyone is happy about your battlefield victories, does not mean you're getting a nuclear guarantee from the United States. Like, what are you thinking? It reminds me when he went before the Israeli Knesset and he started invoking the Holocaust, and even they were like, hey, dude, like, just so, they're like, you don't do that here. That's not the same as whether Israel is going to provide military support for Ukraine.
You know what it reminded me of is at the beginning of this conflict when there were some like moronic U.S. hawks that were like, we should institute a no-fly zone.
Oh yeah,
remember? And
right.
Zelensky was really pushing hard for no-fly zone, and you know, thank God, thank God, at least they didn't do that. But it seems to me like he has a habit of making these sort of like maximalist requests. And then maybe the idea is you sort of like set the Overton window way out here, and then when you ask for something that still is an escalation but isn't NATO membership, then people are like, oh, okay, I guess so, because it doesn't seem as outlandish as like NATO membership or the no-fly zone ultimately was. I don't know. That's kind of my reading of him throwing this out here. He also said, let's put this up because this was noteworthy, about his desire to enter into peace talks. He says Ukraine is ready to hold negotiations with Russia, but only with a new Russian president. So basically saying, no way are we going to sit down at the negotiating table as long as Vladimir Putin is in power. Can't blame him for having that position whatsoever. But as we said a lot before on, ultimately, they do not get to this place in the war without U.S. arms, without U.S. training, without U.S. intelligence. And so the fact that, the Ukrainian war has gone on so long without any sort of like diplomatic negotiations in months and months and months, this is in part because of the U.S. and the U.K. posture that we wanted this war to ultimately continue. So that's nice that that's his position, but we should have a say in this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just, with this, be careful what you wish for. In World War I, everybody's like, oh, we'll never negotiate, and all that. And then Lenin came into power, and everyone was like, oh my God. So, I mean, I don't mean necessarily about the Allies. About his adversaries, but like their allies. They're like, we're united front, all of this. And then Lenin comes into power, and he's like, actually, screw all it. The point is that you have no idea. I mean, what have we learned from Russian revolutions in the middle of a war? Who knows how the hell it all turns out?
Coming next.
Yeah, you genuinely have no idea. Like everybody was like, oh, it's great, democracy is coming to Moscow. 8 months later, we're living in a Bolshevik revolution, a massive civil war, and actually, arguably, a major strategic disaster for the Allies. You never know. And you know, Kadira, the point that we were making about let's really game this out. If Putin is to go, who comes next? Medvedev? Whenever he was in power, everybody's like, oh, this guy, he's very Western, he's much better spoken. He's the one threatening to nuke us right now on
he's
Telegram.
The one saying, no, we could nuke them. They wouldn't do anything. Don't worry about it.
He's
Go
like,
ahead.
yeah, we'll nuke them, whatever. Yeah, they're not gonna do shit. And you're like, oh my God. And he's the nice guy.
Right.
He's the one who remains in power.
Putin was chosen basically by Westerners who thought that he would go along with their, you know, neoliberalism, shock doctrine, whatever. They're like, oh, this is our guy. So again, be careful what you wish for. I mean, there's just like the amount of chaos and fallout if you actually had a regime change and, you know, Putin losing power and who would come next. There are no guarantees in that situation whatsoever. So I do want to encourage, for those of you who are just watching the clips of this, I hope you'll go and watch the whole thing because all of these pieces do kind of
really do bleed together.
Fit together.
This is where the premium show really is the best show.
Yeah, because you know, there were a lot of pieces that we talked about in the A block with regards to nuclear threat that also fit in here as well. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, the idea of Ukraine asking for NATO membership is just fanciful. And I do, listen, we've been very critical here of the Biden administration's approach to Ukraine. We've been very critical today of the Biden administration's approach to Ukraine. But there are people who I would be much more terrified of being in there as president of the United States. Like if Kamala Harris, do you think that she would resist?
No, we'd be in a war. We'll be in a war, 100%.
We'd be there already. And so it's like so terrifying that all of these decisions are hinging on like the continued beating of a 80-year-old heart right now because, yeah, as poor of a position as they have gotten us into, which they have, and, you know, massive, massive failures there all around, it actually could be a lot worse and even more terrifying of a place that we could be in right now.
One redeeming quality of having an 80-year-old in charge is he's at least old enough to actually have lived through, as a sentient adult, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
I think that's right.
And I think that's probably worth something because people who are Gen X and above just they either didn't live through it or they just don't remember it at all.
It's not real to them.
It's just not real.
You know, they haven't lived with this threat. I mean, we haven't lived with this threat. This is all very new to us, but yeah, I think that is one of the, you know, this is why I'm opposed to the age limits that people float here, because there are advantages of people who have been around the block. Because the other thing with Biden is I think he's not as easily like coerced and snowed by the generals as certainly as Obama was or as Trump was.
That's true.
And again, this is all, you know, in the context of the overwhelming overall criticism of this administration, but better than some other people who could be in there. Hillary Clinton at the helm right now, God save us.
Yeah. Miss No-Fly Zone herself.
Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.